The cowboy waited for his mail-order bride, but an armed outlaw woman took her place. Jack Thompson had spent most of his life under the wide, open sky. His ranch was small but steady, tucked on the edge of a dusty frontier town where the horizon seemed to stretch forever. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the scent of horses, leather, and the faint smell of smoke from distant chimneys. Jack liked the quiet, the rhythm of tending to his animals and repairing fences, and the peace that came with knowing that for now the world was manageable. But despite the calm of the plains, a certain emptiness had grown in his heart. He had spent so many nights alone, staring at the stars, that the silence began to feel heavy. Jack's friends in town had married and started families. Their homes were filled with laughter and the aroma of cooking, and the sound of children running through fields. Jack, by contrast, had only his horse and the creak of the windmill for company. He was strong and capable, but he longed for someone to share his life with, not just a passing companion, but someone who could stand by him, someone whose presence would turn his quiet ranch into a home. One evening, as the sun sank below the hills and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jack made a decision. He would write to a mail-order bride service. He had heard of men in town doing the same, and while he felt some hesitation, the thought of a woman joining his life filled him with cautious hope. He sat at his wooden desk, quill in hand, and wrote carefully. He described his ranch, his lifestyle, and the simple pleasures of his day-to-day existence. He included honest details about his personality, his love for animals, his quiet nature, and the kind of life he could offer. "I am looking for a kind-hearted woman," he wrote, "someone who dreams of a simple life, who will walk beside me through this rugged land and find joy in the little things. I do not have riches, but I have steady hands, a strong back, and a heart willing to love and protect. I hope to meet someone who wishes for the same." After mailing the letter, Jack felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Days passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. He tended to his cattle, mended fences, and fixed the small windmill on the edge of the property. He rode his horse through the golden plains, letting the sun warm his face and the wind whip through his hair. But even the beauty of the land could not fill the growing gap in his heart. Every evening he would glance at the horizon, wondering what the future might hold. Then one morning a letter arrived, edged with neat handwriting and sealed with care. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a letter from a woman named Clara. Her words were gentle and kind, expressing excitement at the thought of joining him on the ranch. She wrote about her love for cooking, her joy in simple crafts, and her dream of a quiet, happy life in the country. She seemed perfect, exactly the kind of woman he had imagined. Jack read the letter over and over. He could almost hear her voice, soft and cheerful, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of happiness. He pictured her stepping off the train, smiling as she looked at the vast expanse of land, and then turning to him with trust in her eyes. He began making small preparations, sweeping the floors, polishing the furniture, and even tending extra carefully to the garden, imagining her delight at seeing fresh vegetables and flowers. The day Clara was supposed to arrive, Jack woke before dawn. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and polished the few belongings he thought she might use. As the train whistle sounded in the distance, Jack's heart pounded. The world seemed to hold its breath with him. He adjusted his hat, smoothed his coat, and walked to the station, imagining her face, her smile, the way she might speak when she saw him. When the train finally rolled into the station, clouds of steam and smoke swirling around, Jack scanned the crowd eagerly. Then he saw her, or so he thought. A woman stepped off the train, tall and confident, her eyes sharp and alert. Her clothes were dusty and worn, and a leather holster hung at her side. Jack blinked, trying to understand. This was not the gentle, timid woman he had imagined. The woman strode with purpose, her gaze sweeping the area, as if she were assessing every person in sight. "Are you Jack Thompson?" she asked, her voice steady and certain. "Yes," Jack replied cautiously, though his mind was racing. "You must be Clara?" The woman shook her head, a sly smile on her face. "No, I'm Ruth Calhoun, Clara's cousin. She sent me in her place." Jack felt a rush of confusion and disappointment. He had pictured a quiet, sweet companion, someone who would bring warmth to the ranch. Instead, before him stood a woman who carried herself with the air of someone who could handle danger as easily as she could light a fire or ride a horse. And yet, there was something intriguing in her confidence, a spark that made him sit a little straighter. Ruth noticed his hesitation and let out a soft laugh. "I know I don't look like your typical bride," she said, "but I promise I can be helpful." Jack wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to turn back, to insist that this was a mistake, but another part, a quieter, more curious part, wanted to see what this woman could do. He nodded slowly. "Well, welcome to the ranch, Ruth. I suppose you'll stay for a while?" Ruth's eyes glimmered with mischief and determination. "For now," she said. "We'll see what happens." As they rode back to the ranch, Jack couldn't help but notice how skillfully Ruth handled her horse, how her eyes constantly scanned the landscape, and how she seemed completely at ease with the land and the challenges it presented. Jack had expected someone fragile, delicate, needing protection. Instead, he found someone who could protect herself, and perhaps even him. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in deep shades of purple and gold, Jack sat on his porch watching Ruth move about the ranch. She handled chores with speed and precision, her presence commanding yet strangely comforting. Jack felt a strange mixture of frustration and admiration. The life he had imagined was not arriving as planned, but somehow it was arriving in a form he had never expected. He went to bed that night, with his thoughts restless but alive. The emptiness he had felt for so long seemed less oppressive. Perhaps life had a way of surprising people, he thought. Perhaps the quiet, steady existence he had craved was not about finding what he expected, but learning to adapt to what life placed in front of him. And maybe, just maybe, this unexpected arrival was the beginning of something he had never dared to imagine. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the ranch, vast and full of possibilities. And for the first time in years, Jack felt a spark of hope, a curiosity about the days to come, and a quiet excitement about the strange, fearless woman who had stepped into his life in place of the bride he had been waiting for. The next morning, the ranch woke early under the soft glow of dawn. Jack was already outside feeding the horses and checking the fences when Ruth joined him. She moved with quiet confidence, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She carried herself differently than anyone Jack had ever known, a mix of strength, skill, and alertness. It was impossible not to notice. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and steady. She handed Jack a small bucket for the horses. "Let's get this done. We've got a long day ahead." Normally, he worked alone, taking pride in his independence. But something about Ruth's presence made him feel a strange mixture of curiosity and unease. He nodded, and together they moved through the chores. She worked quickly and efficiently, showing knowledge of horses and equipment that Jack could hardly believe. By the time they finished feeding, brushing, and saddling the horses, Jack felt a grudging admiration for her skills. As they mounted their horses and rode along the edge of the property, Jack tried to understand her better. "So, Ruth," he said carefully, "what brings you to help your cousin on her journey? Are you a traveler?" Ruth glanced at him briefly. her eyes sharp and measuring. "You could say that," she replied. "I've been on the move for a long time. Life has a way of keeping you busy." She said it lightly, almost teasingly, but Jack sensed there was more behind her words, a story she wasn't ready to tell. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds being the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional whisper of wind through the grass. Jack noticed how Ruth seemed to read the land, noticing small details he might have missed. She pointed out signs of rustlers nearby, unusual tracks along the dirt road and weak spots in the fences that could let cattle escape. "You pay attention to everything," Jack said finally, impressed. "Most people just ride and don't notice half of what's around them." Ruth smiled faintly. "You learn quickly when you need to survive." Her words hung in the air, carrying an unspoken weight that made Jack uneasy, but also intrigued. He realized she was no ordinary visitor. She had faced challenges that he could only imagine, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that only comes from experience. Back at the ranch, they spent the afternoon repairing fences. Jack handed Ruth nails and hammer, watching as she worked. She was precise and strong, swinging the hammer with ease. He realized that she had brought not only her energy but also a sense of order and capability that the ranch had been missing. Jack had lived alone for years, and he had done fine, but with Ruth, tasks seemed lighter, faster, and somehow more purposeful. While they worked, Jack tried to make small conversation. "Do you like the quiet life?" he asked. "Most people in town prefer something busier, but out here it's just peaceful." Ruth paused for a moment, wiping sweat from her brow. "I like peace," she said carefully. "But I also know that peace can be fragile. You have to be ready when trouble comes, or it disappears." Jack nodded, sensing her deeper meaning. Life in the frontier was unpredictable. Bandits, wild animals, and harsh weather could change a day's plans in an instant. And yet, Ruth seemed prepared for anything. After finishing the repairs, Jack suggested they rest under the shade of a large oak tree near the barn. Ruth accepted, and they both sat quietly, watching the sun begin to descend in the afternoon sky. Jack offered her some water, and she took it gratefully. "I've never met someone like you," Jack admitted, his voice quiet. "Most people are either scared or careful. You seem fearless." Ruth chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Fearless isn't the right word," she said. "You learn to act, even when you're afraid. You can't let fear stop you, especially if there's work to be done." Jack thought about her words, realizing that they held truth beyond the simple chores of ranch life. He had always considered himself brave, but Ruth's life seemed to require a different kind of courage. A courage that combined action, intelligence, and resilience. Over the next few days, Ruth began to settle into the rhythm of the ranch. She cooked simple meals over the open fire, cleaned the small house efficiently, and even helped with the cattle. Jack watched as she handled everything with determination and care. Sometimes she would laugh softly at his attempts to impress her with small tasks, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years. However, Jack also noticed how townspeople reacted to Ruth. When they passed through the market or crossed paths in town, whispers followed them. Some looked uneasy, others curious. Jack could see why. Ruth carried herself in a way that drew attention. She was not ordinary, and the small frontier town was not used to such a confident, self-reliant woman. One evening, as they were closing the barn, a rider appeared on the horizon. Jack squinted and saw a man waving a hand. Ruth's posture changed instantly. She was alert, scanning the landscape carefully. The rider came closer, and it became clear that he was a local farmer seeking help with a missing calf. Jack handed the man a rope and explained what they could do, but Ruth was already taking charge, instructing both Jack and the farmer with precise directions. After the man left, Jack turned to her. "You really know how to handle people?" he said, impressed. Ruth shrugged. "Ruth, you get used to it," she replied. "Sometimes being in charge is the only way things get done." Part of him wanted the gentle life he had imagined with a mail-order bride, but another part, a larger part, was drawn to Ruth's strength, her independence, and her ability to act decisively. She was nothing like Clara, the woman he had been expecting, and yet, somehow, she was exactly what the ranch needed. As the sun set that evening, Ruth and Jack sat outside, the fire crackling softly nearby. The sky turned shades of purple and gold, and the ranch was bathed in warm light. Jack realized that the emptiness he had felt for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by curiosity, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of trust. Ruth glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "You're different from most people," she said. "You notice things. You care. I can see it in the way you look at the land, at the animals, at life." Jack smiled faintly, feeling the weight of loneliness lifting just slightly. "I suppose I do," he admitted. "It's important to me, and I suppose, in a way, I've been waiting for someone to notice it too." Ruth nodded, and for a brief moment there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition that their lives, though unexpected, were beginning to intertwine. The ranch was no longer just Jack's solitary world. It was becoming a place of shared effort, unexpected companionship, and the subtle promise of connection. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought about the days to come. He had imagined Clara arriving, a quiet and gentle presence to share his life. Instead, Ruth had come, strong, fearless, and entirely unpredictable. And yet, for the first time in years, Jack felt a spark of hope and excitement. Life had not gone as he planned, but it was going somewhere new, somewhere interesting, and perhaps even somewhere better than he could have imagined. Life on the ranch settled into a steady rhythm, but Jack soon realized that having Ruth around meant that nothing stayed simple for long. She moved through the days with a confidence that made even routine tasks feel alive. Jack had grown used to the quiet pace of his solo life, but now every moment seemed to carry energy, unpredictability, and even a touch of excitement. Ruth's presence brought a new sense of possibility, and Jack felt it in the way his heart beat a little faster, even during ordinary chores. One morning, Jack was rounding up the cattle near the far edge of the property when Ruth appeared beside him, riding her horse with ease. She had spotted tracks near the riverbank, and her sharp eyes had noticed something unusual. "Looks like someone's been through here recently," Ruth said, pointing at a series of hoofprints and scuffed dirt. "Could be cattle rustlers. They move fast and quiet, but they leave traces." Jack frowned. Rustlers were rare, but they could be dangerous. He had faced small troubles before, but never anyone who threatened the cattle directly. "You think they'll come close to the ranch?" he asked, tightening his grip on the reins. Ruth shook her head slowly. "Hard to say, but it's better to be ready. Don't wait for trouble to find you. Go to it first." Jack followed her instructions, checking fences, reinforcing gates, and ensuring the cattle were safely contained. Ruth demonstrated skillful methods he had never considered, tightening weak posts, moving animals strategically, and setting up signals to alert them if anyone approached the ranch at night. As the days went by, Jack noticed the town beginning to talk more about Ruth. Some of the townspeople were curious, others were cautious. Women whispered about her strength and confidence, while men watched from a distance, unsure of what to make of her. Jack felt proud but also protective. He realized he had grown attached to her presence, even though he wasn't ready to admit it. One afternoon, while Jack was repairing a section of fence, Ruth suggested a new approach. "If rustlers are nearby, we need to think ahead," she said. "We should move some of the more valuable cattle closer to the barn. That way, if anything happens, they're easier to protect." Jack hesitated. Moving the cattle would take time and effort. But when he saw Ruth's determination, he knew she was right. Together they guided the herd, calling out to the animals and moving them carefully through the dusty fields. Ruth's voice was firm but calm, and the cattle seemed to respond to her presence in a way Jack had never seen before. As they finished the task, Jack wiped sweat from his brow and looked at her with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. "I don't know what I would do without you," he admitted. Ruth shrugged lightly, a small smile on her lips. "You'd figure it out," she said. "But it's better when people work together." The evening brought another surprise. A neighboring rancher rode up, bringing news of a group of travelers who had lost their way and needed help. Jack was ready to offer assistance, but Ruth had already prepared supplies and mapped out the safest route for them. Jack watched as she led the travelers back toward town, giving them instructions and ensuring their safety. Her decisiveness impressed him, and he began to see her as someone he could rely on in ways he had never imagined. But it wasn't just work that revealed Ruth's character. One night, as the two of them sat outside by the fire, she spoke quietly about her past. "I wasn't always on my own," she said. "I had a family once, but life, it changes. You learn fast who you can trust, and you learn faster who you can't." Jack listened, intrigued, but careful. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," he said gently. Ruth nodded, staring into the flames. "I have, but I've learned to keep moving, keep my eyes open, and never rely on someone else to protect me. You've got to protect yourself first." Jack felt a strange respect for her. She had lived a life full of challenges, yet she carried herself with calm confidence rather than bitterness. He realized that her strength wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and unshakable. The next few weeks were filled with work and quiet tension. Jack and Ruth continued to handle the ranch together, but now they faced new challenges: wild weather, occasional problems with livestock, and the constant awareness of possible rustlers in the area. Ruth taught Jack techniques to spot danger, how to move quietly and quickly, and how to think like someone who might try to take advantage of the land. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds stretched across the horizon, and wind whipped through the open plains. Jack scrambled to secure the horses and cattle, and Ruth moved quickly, closing gates and reinforcing the barn. The rain came down in heavy sheets, and the two of them worked side by side, shouting over the wind and rain. For the first time, Jack felt that Ruth was not just a helper. She was a true partner, someone who could face challenges head-on and adapt without hesitation. After the storm passed, the ranch was damp and muddy, but intact. Jack looked at Ruth, water dripping from her hair, and realized that he admired her more than he could explain. She had changed the way he thought about the world, about people, and about what it meant to work together. Life continued, and Ruth became more involved with the day-to-day operations than Jack had ever expected. She rode out to check fences, handled the cattle, and even began teaching him some of the techniques she had learned over the years. Jack found himself learning from her constantly, amazed at how much she knew and how confident she was in every decision. Despite the hard work, there were moments of quiet joy. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, sharing stories about their past, laughing at small mistakes, or watching the stars stretch across the sky. Jack began to feel that the loneliness he had carried for so many years was fading, replaced by a sense of connection and even friendship. Yet, beneath the calm, there was always a sense of tension. Jack knew that life on the frontier could change in an instant, and Ruth's past suggested that danger could appear when least expected. He realized that while he had imagined a peaceful, gentle life with Clara, life with Ruth was teaching him something different, something real. Life could be unpredictable, messy, and challenging, but it could also be thrilling, meaningful, and full of learning. One morning, while checking the northern pasture, Jack spotted a group of strangers in the distance. He called Ruth over, and together they observed quietly. Ruth pointed out small signs, footprints, disturbed grass, and a trail leading away from the main road. "They're moving carefully," she said. "Could be rustlers, could be travelers. We need to watch." For the first time, Jack felt the full weight of responsibility, not just for himself, but for the ranch, the cattle, and for Ruth as well. He realized that having Ruth there made him stronger, more aware, and more capable. She had changed the way he faced life, teaching him that strength, courage, and careful thought could coexist. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack and Ruth sat quietly on the porch, the wind rustling through the trees. Jack reflected on the past weeks, how unexpected Ruth's arrival had been, and how her presence had already transformed the ranch, his life, and even his perspective on what it meant to live fully. Ruth glanced at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, and then she smiled softly. "You're learning fast," she said. "You've got good instincts, Jack. Just need to trust them." Jack nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride. "I think I'm learning more than I expected," he admitted. "And I'm grateful you're here." Ruth's smile widened slightly, and for the first time Jack sensed that her presence might not just be about work or survival. It could be about something deeper, something neither of them had expected when she first arrived. The ranch, the land, and the endless plain stretched out before them, full of possibility and challenge. Jack realized that the life he had imagined might not be what he truly needed. With Ruth by his side, the days were harder, yes, but richer, fuller, and more alive. And for the first time in a long while, Jack felt ready for whatever the future might bring. Life on the ranch had become busy and unpredictable, but Jack and Ruth had settled into a rhythm that worked. They shared the chores, the long hours in the sun, and the quiet evenings under the stars. Jack had grown to respect Ruth's strength and intelligence, and he noticed that his own confidence had increased. With her guidance, he had learned to anticipate problems, move carefully through the land, and think strategically. Yet, even with their partnership, neither of them could have imagined the challenge that was about to arrive. It began one morning with the distant sound of hooves. Jack was checking the cattle in the far pasture when he noticed a cloud of dust rising from the horizon. At first he thought it was a group of travelers, but Ruth's sharp eyes immediately caught the difference. "They're moving too fast for travelers," she said, her voice steady but alert. "And look at the way they're riding. They're heading straight for the ranch." Rustlers had always been a distant concern, something to watch for but rarely to fear. Now it was clear that danger was coming, and they had very little time to prepare. He hurried back toward the barn, with Ruth close behind, already giving instructions. "Help the cattle into the corral," she called over her shoulder. "Keep them calm. Make sure the gates are secure." Jack moved quickly, shouting to the animals and guiding them toward safety. Ruth, meanwhile, prepared the barn, checking windows and doors, making sure everything could hold firm if someone tried to enter. Her movements were confident, precise, and unflustered, as if she had done this 100 times before. Jack couldn't help but feel impressed and grateful that she was by his side. As the riders approached, Jack noticed their rough clothing and the determined way they held their weapons. Ruth scanned them carefully, whispering instructions to Jack. "Stay low," she said. "Watch the left flank. If they split up, we'll need to protect the animals and the barn at the same time." The attackers circled the ranch trying to find a weakness. Jack felt his heart pounding in his chest, but Ruth's calm presence helped steady him. He watched her step forward confidently, meeting the outlaw's eyes with a mix of courage and determination. Her stance told them that she was not afraid, and that alone gave him a sense of relief. The confrontation was tense but brief. Ruth shouted instructions, guiding Jack as they moved the cattle and secured the property. The outlaws realized that the ranch was well prepared and heavily defended, and after a few attempts to intimidate them, they finally retreated, riding away into the distance. When the dust settled, Jack felt a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "I don't know how you do it," he said, breathing heavily. "You were fearless out there." Ruth shrugged, though a small smile appeared on her face. "It's not about being fearless," she said. "It's about being prepared and doing what needs to be done. Fear doesn't help anyone." Jack nodded, feeling the truth in her words. He had always considered himself capable, but Ruth's ability to act decisively under pressure had shown him a new level of courage, one that combined brains, skill, and calmness under stress. The rest of the day was spent repairing minor damage and calming the cattle. Jack noticed how naturally Ruth had taken charge, not only protecting the ranch, but also teaching him in the process. He had expected a quiet companion, someone gentle and timid, but Ruth was nothing like that. She was strong, capable, and intelligent, and Jack realized that he had begun to rely on her presence in a way he had never imagined. That evening, as they sat outside by the fire, Jack reflected on what had happened. "I thought life on the ranch would be quiet," he said softly. "I imagined a gentle woman joining me, someone to share the simple days with. But you're nothing like I imagined. And yet, I'm grateful." Ruth looked at him, her eyes softening. "Life rarely goes the way we plan," she said. "Sometimes it gives us something unexpected, and sometimes it's better than we could have hoped for." Jack smiled faintly, realizing that she was right. He had been waiting for a predictable life, one filled with gentle routines and quiet evenings. But Ruth had brought excitement, courage, and partnership, things he had not expected but now could not imagine living without. Over the next few days, the ranch slowly returned to normal. Jack and Ruth worked together more efficiently than ever, their trust in each other growing with every task completed. Ruth taught him how to anticipate problems, how to prepare for challenges, and how to face unexpected events with calm determination. Jack began to notice that he was changing, becoming stronger, braver, and more confident. He realized that Ruth had not only protected the ranch, but had also helped him grow as a person. One afternoon, a traveler came to the ranch seeking shelter. Ruth welcomed him kindly, providing food and water while Jack helped tend to his horse. They listened to his story, a simple tale of a journey gone wrong, and offered guidance on the safest routes through the plains. Jack noticed how naturally Ruth handled the situation, balancing caution with compassion. She had a way of making people feel safe without appearing soft or weak, and Jack admired her for it. That night, after the traveler had gone on his way, Jack and Ruth sat outside under the stars. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light on their faces. Jack realized how much he had come to rely on her, not just for the work around the ranch, but for companionship, guidance, and even emotional support. "You're different from anyone I've ever known," Jack said quietly. "You make this ranch stronger? And me too." Ruth smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "That's what happens when people work together," she said. "Life can be harsh and the world can be unpredictable, but when you have someone to stand with you, it becomes easier to face it." Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude and connection. He had imagined Clara arriving as a gentle companion, someone to share quiet days with, but Ruth had arrived as a force of nature, fearless, capable, and wise. And yet, in the months they had spent together, he had come to realize that her strength and confidence were exactly what he needed. The following weeks were a mix of routine work and careful vigilance. Jack and Ruth continued to reinforce the ranch, repair fences, and care for the cattle. Ruth shared her knowledge of the land, teaching him how to read tracks, anticipate weather changes, and spot potential danger before it arrived. Jack noticed how much he had learned in such a short time, and he began to trust his instincts more than ever before. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack and Ruth walked together along the edge of the pasture. The sun was setting, casting the plains in warm golden light. Jack felt a sense of peace, tempered by the knowledge that life on the frontier could change at any moment. He turned to Ruth, noticing how confident and calm she appeared even after the chaos of the past weeks. "You've taught me a lot," Jack said softly. "Not just about the ranch, but about life and about courage." Ruth looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "We learn from each other," she said. "No one does it alone. Even someone who thinks they can survive on their own. They need help sometimes." Jack realized that she was right. He had thought he could manage everything alone, but Ruth had shown him that life was better when shared. She had brought strength, wisdom, and a fearless spirit to his world, and in return he had begun to open his heart in ways he had never imagined. As the stars appeared overhead, Jack felt a quiet excitement about the days to come. Life on the ranch would always be full of challenges, but with Ruth by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He had expected a gentle companion, but instead he had found a partner, someone who could stand beside him, guide him, and even teach him to be braver, stronger, and wiser. And for the first time in his life, Jack realized that the life he had imagined might have been too small, too simple. Ruth had arrived unexpectedly, bringing with her not just skill and courage, but also the possibility of a future full of growth, partnership, and perhaps even deeper feelings that neither of them had yet named. The sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm glow across the ranch. Jack stood outside, watching the cattle graze and the wind ripple through the golden grass. Life had grown busy, but satisfying. He and Ruth had faced challenges, worked side by side, and learned to trust each other. The ranch had never been stronger, and neither had Jack. Yet he felt a strange anticipation in the air that morning, as if something was about to change. He heard the distant whistle of a train, a sound that had always filled him with hope. But this time it brought a different kind of anticipation. Clara, the woman he had originally written to, was finally arriving. Jack felt a mixture of curiosity and anxiety and uncertainty. He had imagined this day for months, dreaming of her arrival, picturing gentle conversations and quiet evenings together. But now he had grown so accustomed to Ruth, her strength, her skill, her presence, that he wasn't sure what he wanted or expected anymore. As the train rolled into the small station, Jack and Ruth walked toward the platform. Jack's heart raced, but he tried to steady his nerves. Ruth's hand brushed his lightly, a small gesture that brought unexpected comfort. Together, they waited. When Clara stepped off the train, she looked exactly as Jack had imagined, soft-spoken, smiling, and dressed neatly for the journey. She carried a small suitcase and walked with a gentle, careful grace. Jack felt a pang of recognition and nostalgia. This was the life he had once hoped for, the life he had dreamed of in his quiet, lonely nights. Jack Thompson? Clara asked, her voice warm and sweet. Yes, Jack replied, taking a careful step forward. You must be Clara. Clara smiled, and for a moment Jack felt a wave of old excitement. But then he looked at Ruth, standing confidently by his side, her eyes calm and steady. Ruth gave a small nod, as if silently acknowledging that this was his moment to make a choice. Clara glanced at Ruth, curiosity and slight confusion in her eyes. You're? She began, unsure of how to address her. This is Ruth, Jack said quietly, feeling the weight of his words. She has been helping me with the ranch. Clara's expression shifted. She seemed polite but cautious, unsure how to react to the presence of this woman who clearly did not fit the image of the gentle bride she had imagined herself replacing. Jack felt the moment stretch, heavy with uncertainty. He realized that he had to be honest with himself, and with both women. Clara had been his hope, his dream of a quiet life. But Ruth had become something else entirely. She was not just a helper. She was a partner, a presence he could not imagine living without. Clara, Jack said carefully, I've waited for you to arrive. But he paused, searching for the right words. Things have changed. Life on the ranch has not been as I imagined, and neither has my heart. Clara looked at him, her expression gentle and understanding. She seemed to sense the truth in his words, and after a moment, she nodded. I think I understand, she said softly. You've found someone who belongs here. Someone who belongs with you. Jack's eyes shifted to Ruth. She smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and affection in her gaze. Jack felt a deep sense of relief and certainty. He had expected this moment to be complicated, but in truth, it had made his feelings clear. Ruth was not only capable, but she had become an essential part of his life. He could not imagine the ranch or his days without her. Clara stepped forward, offering a handshake to Ruth. Thank you for taking care of him, she said, and for helping on the ranch. I see now that you were exactly what he needed. Ruth accepted the handshake, her firm grip and calm smile putting Clara at ease. It was my choice, she said simply, and I'm glad to have helped. Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. Clara had been kind and understanding, leaving without resentment, and Ruth had remained steadfast and brave. He realized that life had given him something better than he had imagined, a woman who was equal to him in courage, intelligence, and determination. Ruth was more than a partner. She was a reflection of the strength and independence he had always admired, but had never thought he could find in someone else. Back at the ranch, Jack and Ruth worked together as usual, but now with a new sense of clarity. They had faced challenges, threats, and the unexpected, and through it all, their bond had grown stronger. Jack felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of excitement for the future. Life was no longer about solitude or quiet dreams. It was about partnership, growth, and the courage to face anything together. In the days that followed, the ranch thrived. Jack and Ruth managed the cattle, repaired fences, and kept the property safe from any potential threats. Their teamwork was seamless, and their trust in each other became unshakable. They shared laughter, conversation, and quiet moments under the wide-open sky, learning more about each other with every passing day. Jack realized that the dream he had once held, the life of a quiet, gentle partnership, had evolved. Life had surprised him with a companion who challenged him, encouraged him, and stood firmly beside him in every situation. Ruth had brought strength where he had expected gentleness, courage where he had expected caution, and partnership where he had once imagined companionship. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Jack and Ruth stood side by side on the porch, watching the cattle graze and the wind move through the fields. Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had hoped for love and companionship, and life had delivered something far more meaningful: equality, respect, and the deep connection that comes from facing life's challenges together. Ruth looked at him, her eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "We've come a long way," she said softly. Jack nodded. "We have, and I wouldn't change a single thing." They stood together in comfortable silence, feeling the land beneath their feet and the vast sky above them. Jack realized that true life was never about what you expect. It was about what you create, the people you meet, and the bonds you form along the way. Ruth had come unexpectedly, and in doing so, she had transformed his world entirely. As the night settled over the ranch, Jack and Ruth prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tasks and challenges. But for the first time, Jack felt truly ready for anything. Life was unpredictable, but with Ruth by his side, he had the strength, courage, and partnership to face it all. The days, weeks, and months that followed were filled with hard work, quiet joy, and shared accomplishments. The ranch flourished, and Jack and Ruth's bond deepened. They celebrated small victories together: the birth of a calf, the repair of a fence, a clear day on the plains. Each success reminded them that life, while unpredictable, was better when shared with someone who understood and supported you. Jack often reflected on how different life had turned out from what he had imagined. He had dreamed of a quiet, gentle partner arriving by mail order. Instead, he had received someone far stronger, braver, and more capable than he could have imagined. And in that unexpected gift, he had discovered a new kind of happiness, one built on respect, trust, and true partnership. By the time the year had passed, Jack understood that life's surprises could be its greatest blessings. Ruth had arrived when he least expected, transforming the ranch, his heart, and his view of the world. Together, they had faced danger, solved problems, and grown stronger. And together, they had built a life that was far richer, more exciting, and more meaningful than Jack had ever imagined. The plains stretched endlessly before them, vast and full of possibility. Jack stood beside Ruth, feeling the weight of gratitude, hope, and joy. He realized that true life was never about perfection or expectation. It was about facing the unexpected, rising to the challenges, and discovering the people who make you stronger along the way. And in Ruth, he had found exactly that: a partner, a friend, and the love he had never known he needed. As night fell and stars glittered across the sky, Jack and Ruth sat together on the porch, the ranch quiet around them. The world felt wide, open, and full of promise. They had faced trials, learned from each other, and grown closer with every day. And in that shared strength, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, side by side, equal in courage, and bound by trust. Jack realized then that life's true gift was not the calm he had imagined, nor the gentle companion he had expected, but the unexpected, fearless, and strong partner who had arrived and transformed everything. With Ruth by his side, the future was no longer uncertain. It was full of promise, adventure, and the quiet joy of knowing that they would face it together forever.